There is something I want us to talk about today that many people living in controlling relationships struggle to understand. Why is there never any peace? Why is there always another problem, another misunderstanding, another accusation, another emotional emergency, another issue you are expected to resolve, another conversation that leaves you explaining yourself for 3 hours, another crisis that appears just as you begin to regain your strength? You settle one matter, and before your nervous system has even had time to breathe, another one begins. And because you're a sincere person, because you care about the relationship, because you believe conflict should be resolved, you keep approaching each new problem as though it is an isolated issue. You think, okay, maybe if I explain myself better, maybe if I become more patient, maybe if I choose the right words, maybe if I apologize for my part, if I prayed harder, maybe if I become more understanding, if I finally identify what is upsetting them, we can restore peace. So you keep working, you keep analyzing, you keep adjusting, you keep returning to conversations that never seem to reach a conclusion. You keep trying to solve what you believe is a relationship problem. But what if the problem is not that the two of you have failed to find peace? What if the absence of peace is serving a purpose? What if the chaos is not an accidental interruption to the relationship? What if in some relationships, the chaos is one of the ways control is maintained? That is a conversation I want us to have, because there are relationship problems that can be solved through communication, humility, mutual understanding, and change. And then there are power problems that communication alone cannot solve. And you need discernment to know which one you are facing. In a healthy relationship, both people participate in restoring connection. Both people can examine themselves. Both people can admit when they are wrong. Both people care about the effect of their behavior. Both people are willing to make adjustments. Conflict may still happen, misunderstanding will happen, difficult seasons will happen, but the burden of creating peace does not permanently fall on one person. But in a controlling dynamic, something different often happens. One person creates, escalates, or prolongs instability, then the other person is assigned responsibility for ending it. They withdraw, and you must pursue. They become offended, and you must repair. They accuse, and you must prove your innocence. They create confusion, and you must find clarity for both of you. They change the standard, and you must keep adjusting. They punish you with silence, hostility, tension, or emotional distance, and you must discover what you did wrong. You become the investigator, the mediator, the counselor, the peacemaker, the intercessor, and the emotional caretaker. And they become the person whose discomfort governs the entire atmosphere. And then over time, your life begins to revolve around one question: what do I need to do to make things peaceful again? But that may not be the most important question. A more revealing question is, why? Why am I always the person required to restore the peace that I did not destroy? You see, chaos can keep you too occupied to see clearly. Persistent conflict does more than exhaust you. It consumes your attention. When you are constantly managing the next emotional crisis, you have very little mental space left to examine the structure of the relationship. You do not have time to step back and ask, why does this keep happening? Why are the rules always changing? Why does peace depend on my compliance? Why am I always apologizing, but the same behavior continues? Why does every concern I raise become a discussion about my tone, my flaws, my attitude, or my alleged disrespect? Why is the original issue never actually addressed? You are too busy putting out fires to ask who keeps striking the match. And this is one of the most damaging effects of chronic relational chaos. It keeps you in reaction mode. You are not choosing from clarity. You are responding to pressure. You are not living from a settled sense of identity. You are trying to survive the emotional temperature of the room. You are not asking what you believe. You are asking what will prevent the next eruption. That is how a person can slowly lose contact with herself. Not necessarily through one dramatic event, but through thousands of small adjustments made in the name of peace. And you see, at the heart of many controlling dynamics is the belief about hierarchy. One person may not say it openly, but their behavior communicates, my feelings matter more than yours. My interpretation is more valid than yours. My comfort should organize the relationship. My mistakes deserve understanding. Your mistakes deserve consequences. I am entitled to question you. You are disrespectful when you question me. I decide when the conflict begins. I decide when it ends. I decide what counts as an apology. I decide whether your explanation is acceptable. In other words, the relationship may appear to be between two equal adults, but it operates as though one person is the authority and the other is perpetually under review. And you see, this is especially serious within Christian relationships because controlling behavior can be covered with spiritual language. Dominance may be called leadership. Compliance may be called submission. Fear may be called respect. Silence may be called peace. Endless emotional labor may be called being a good wife. And when sacred language is placed over an unhealthy power arrangement, it becomes much harder for the woman inside to trust what she is experiencing. She may think, okay, maybe this is what marriage requires. Maybe this is the cost of covenant. Maybe I am resisting God. Maybe I am too independent. Maybe my desires for mutuality is pride. But biblical unity does not require the destruction of personhood. Marriage does not make one image bearer more human than the other. It does not make one conscience sacred and the other disposable. It does not make one person the permanent creator of problems and the other the permanent cleaner of emotional messes. Peace requires a certain degree of equality, not sameness. Not the absence of roles, differences, or responsibility, but peace requires that both people are recognized as human beings whose thoughts, needs, limitations, and dignity matter. Peace leaves space for another person to think independently, to rest, to notice, to make choices, to develop confidence, to hear their own thoughts, to recognize patterns, to remember who she is. And that can feel threatening to someone who depends on control. Because when you are calm, you can observe. When you are rested, you can question. When you are no longer rushing to restore their comfort, you can assess the relationship. When you stop reacting, the pattern becomes visible. When you stop explaining, you begin to hear what is actually being said. And when you stop chasing peace, you may discover that the other person was never pursuing peace with you. They were pursuing the return of your compliance. This is why some controlling dynamics become more intense when the targeted person begins to grow stronger. She starts setting boundaries. She begins, taking time before responding. She stops accepting blame automatically. She seeks outside perspective. She becomes financially informed. She stops arguing with obvious patterns. She begins to recognize that someone's anger does not automatically mean she has done something wrong. Suddenly, the old method stops working as effectively. And when control is threatened, chaos may increase. Not always because the person has consciously designed a strategy, but because the existing arrangement is no longer producing the same result. And you cannot solve a problem whose purpose is to keep moving. This is where many women lose years of their lives. They believe the next conversation will be the final one. The next explanation will make everything clear. The next sacrifice will prove their love. The next apology will settle the matter. The next counseling session will make the other person understand. But the goalpost keeps moving. You resolve what they complained about, and a new complaint appears. You change the behavior, and the interpretation changes. You meet the standard, and the standard becomes stricter. You offer reassurance, and they demand proof. You provide proof, but they question your motive. You answer the accusation, and now the problem is that you answered defensively. You apologize for your tone, and now the problem is that you did not apologize quickly enough. You cannot win. You cannot win because the issue is no longer the issue. The issue is that you must remain in the position of proving, pursuing, adjusting, and repairing. And the moment you finally understand that, something changes. You stop asking, how can I solve every new problem? And you begin asking, what pattern is being maintained through these problems? That is discernment. Discernment is not simply identifying whether a statement is true or false. It is recognizing what a repeated pattern produces. Does it produce mutual understanding, or does it produce your exhaustion? Does it lead to accountability, or does it return you to submission? Does the conflict eventually create deeper honesty, or does it leave one person with more power and the other with less confidence? Look at the fruit. We need to discuss the additive promise of the next peaceful season. Because you see, one reason these dynamics are so difficult to recognize is that there may be genuinely peaceful periods. There may be tenderness, apologies, promises, prayer, affection, moments when the person appears deeply remorseful. And you may think, this is who they really are. We are finally returning to what the relationship could be. But then the instability begins again. And those brief periods of peace can make you work even harder because you now have evidence that peace is possible. You tell yourself that if I can just avoid the next trigger, say the right thing, or become the right version of yourself, perhaps the good period will last. But peace that depends on your constant self-monitoring is not peace. It is a temporary suspension of punishment. Peace that exists only while you remain agreeable is not peace. It is conditional acceptance. Peace that disappears whenever you exercise agency is not peace. It is control waiting to be challenged. Stop measuring the relationship by its best moments, because many people assess relationships by its most beautiful moments, but discernment requires you to assess it by its consistent structure. You see, almost anyone can be kind for an evening. Almost anyone can apologize when they fear losing access. Almost anyone can make promises during a crisis. The deeper questions are, what happens when you disagree? What happens when you say no? What happens when their desires conflict with your well-being? What happens when you ask for accountability? What happens when you do not rush to suit them? What happens when you require change rather than another explanation? What happens when you stop carrying the relationship for both of you? That is where the true structure becomes visible. You may not have a communication problem. You may not, because you see, sometimes women spend years learning how to communicate more gently with someone who understands them perfectly well. The problem is not always that you have failed to communicate. Sometimes your words have been understood and rejected. Sometimes the other person knows you are hurt but does not believe your hurt should outweigh their entitlement. Sometimes they know exactly what you mean but benefit from pretending they do not. Sometimes the confusion keeps you talking long after the necessary information has already been revealed. You do not need to explain the same pain in 20 different ways to prove that it matters. A person does not have to agree with every interpretation you hold, but when someone repeatedly responds to your humanity as though it is an obstacle to their authority, you are no longer dealing with an ordinary misunderstanding. You are dealing with a power arrangement. Look, there is another cost we need to name. When someone keeps you in a state of emotional emergency, your spiritual life can also become distorted. You may begin praying only for the relationship to calm down. You may read scripture merely to discover what more you are required to tolerate. You may interpret every difficult emotion as a spiritual failure. You may become so afraid of displeasing the other person that their reactions begin to shape your understanding of God. Their anger feels like God's anger. Their rejection feels like divine disapproval. Their approval feels like evidence that you are finally behaving correctly. This is a dangerous confusion. No human being should become the emotional interpreter of your standing before God. Someone else's displeasure is not automatic evidence of your disobedience. Their anger does not make them right. Their confidence does not make their interpretation divine. Their title does not place them above examination. Your relationship with God must not become a lever someone else pulls to restore your compliance. Now, what should you do with this clarity? First, stop treating every new conflict as a completely separate event. Write down the patterns, not merely what the argument was about, but how the interaction unfolded, what triggered the tension, who was expected to fix it. Were you allowed to express your reality? Did the conversation produce genuine accountability? Did the same issue return? Was peace restored through mutual understanding or through a surrender? You see, patterns become harder to deny when they are placed beside one another. Second, stop believing that every emotional emergency requires an immediate response. Pressure reduces discernment. Take time. Pause before defending yourself. Do not make another major decision simply to make the tension stop. Temporary relief is not always resolution. 3. Seek wise and trustworthy support. Not every friend, pastor or counselor understands controlling dynamics. You need someone who will not dismiss ordinary conflicts as abuse, but who will not spiritualize coercion, intimidation, chronic confusion, or fear. 4th, remember that your role is not to regulate another adult's entire emotional world. You can communicate respectfully. You can take responsibility for your behavior. You can apologize when you are wrong. You can show compassion, but you cannot create peace with someone who repeatedly uses unrest to maintain unequal arrangement. Peace requires participation from both people. Finally, take safety seriously. when control includes threat, physical violence, sexual pressure, stalking, isolation, destruction of property, monitoring, restriction of money, or retaliation for seeking help. This is no longer merely a difficult communication pattern. Seek confidential support from an appropriately trained professional or specialist service and make decisions with safety in mind. So now, perhaps the deepest question is not, why can we never solve our problem? Perhaps the question is, what becomes possible for this person when I am too exhausted to think clearly? And perhaps another question is, who would I become if I stopped organizing my entire life around restoring someone else's comfort? Because the woman who is constantly solving crises has no time to build. She doesn't. She has no time to hear herself. She has no time to pursue purpose. She has no time to notice how much she has changed. She remains useful to the system because she remains occupied by the system. But clarity begins when she stops running towards every fire, when she pauses, when she observes, when she stops measuring her faithfulness by how much unrest she can absorb, when she recognizes that peace is not her individual assignment. You were not created to spend your entire life repairing chaos that another person keeps recreating. You were not created to prove your love by remaining permanently unsettled. You were not created to live beneath another image bearer, as though their soul is more valuable, their comfort more sacred, or their voice more authoritative than yours. You are responsible for your choices. You are responsible for your integrity. You are responsible for how you speak, how you act, and how you respond. But you are not responsible for making another person feel powerful. And you are not responsible for maintaining a false peace purchased on your exhaustion. Sometimes the narrative must change before the decision can change. The old narrative says, if I work hard enough, I can finally make this relationship peaceful. The new narrative may be, I cannot create mutual peace alone, and I will no longer confuse endless crisis management with love. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. And clarity is where you begin to take the pen back. Redefine your narrative. Thrive with Miriam. God bless you.